One of the challenges I guess I have as a real estate agent with the way the market has gone especially the last couple of years, is when I go to price a home and going, I have no comp sales. I know I have no comp sales. And then you end up in a multiple offer situation and you're like, okay, we just kind of I feel like some days we throw a dart at the dartboard and go, let's hope it appraises.
Well, some more than others. The problem is the definition of comparables. With each problem to be solved, each value that you're trying to come up with, each sales price that you're coming up with, you have to look at it from a perspective of who's buying that property, or why did that property sell? What's the motivation behind that property? And then we kind of have to change the way we look at it. We used to, look around and say, okay, well, that's an Aho construction home or a Hayden construction home, and we knew, boom, 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 that's all you got to do. Well, now, realistically, as if we're going to say Aho and Hayden, West Pasco, for instance, if it's got 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, it's comparable, period, end of story.
Okay.
It can be 1,100 square feet, it could be 1,500 square feet. It kind of doesn't matter because you're dealing with the same person. You're talking about the affordable end of that market in newer construction in an area where a certain income bracket is fitting. So realistically, it's what you can and can't get speculatively, because there's always that top sale, right? There's always that top listing that's sitting there active while everything else underneath it is pending, price-wise. Right. Well, that's the benchmark, right? Real market value falls somewhere between that highest pending and that lowest active.
Sure.
So realistically, that's your tipping point of where absorption happens. So when I'm pricing homes or helping realtor price homes, that's what I look at. It's like, okay, well, what are we competing against? If I throw this on the market, where's it going to land in this array of potential comparables of buyers who can afford in this price point? It's a little different from an appraisal in that standpoint, because I have to support and prove that to a lender within a certain number of guidelines. But the real factor, the real world application for you, of course, is, did it get absorbed? Mm-hmm. And at the point in which it can be absorbed, there's a point in which it won't be absorbed because it's just too expensive, because buying power isn't there. So that's really what I look at when I'm talking about pricing a home, is not so much the specific line-by-line comparability as the more general sense of comparability and the absorption threshold of price point.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
It did.
That was kind of a lot of big words thrown together.
It made sense.
It did make sense.
Okay.
And it was helpful, I think, especially from a real estate standpoint. Mm-hmm. It was a little more helpful to kind of have your insight on how you can generalize.
Well, your mission's different than mine. Your mission's to serve your client.
Well, absolutely.
Mine's to write a report that Fannie Mae can accept and meets all their guidelines and then proves market value, which is a totally different situation. You're trying to get, if you're representing the seller, the most money. Mm-hmm. And if you're representing the buyer, the least amount of money they can spend for that home. So your mission's different. I mean, I took your code of ethics and went through it, and it reads differently than what our code of ethics does.
Sure.
So...
But we're still all doing the same thing.
Well, yeah,
bringing buyers
just from
and
a different
together.
angle.
Hand in glove, two different purposes, but still in the same area.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you seeing, or how does it affect when somebody comes in and offers $60,000 over what it's actually worth? In the long run, when you have enough people doing that, what's the effect?
Well, yeah, that's a tough question. I always tell people the standard appraiser answer to any question is that depends.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's multiple reasons to have offers like that. The first primary reason would be that it wasn't priced properly,
mm-hmm.
Because that's a pretty big number.
Right.
If it's, we see them all the time. There are 5, really the number that we kind of see frequently is 10% over list.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the advice that people are getting in certain segments of the marketplace. So at the end of the day, as an appraiser, when you're writing an appraisal, the sales price is merely a piece of data
mm-hmm.
that relates to market value, but it's not one you can ignore, because you still have to reconcile the sales price with your value. And that's a piece that's often missing in an appraisal when you review it, is they
mm-hmm.
don't reconcile the two. Well, if it's worth $550 and it's sold for $600, why? What's the
mm-hmm.
difference? And I think appraisers struggle with that because, again, for 20 years prior, we were, going up 1%, 3% every year.
Right.
Well, when you jump up 24% in a single year, all of a sudden you're looking at, well, why did that happen? And it should be related to the competition. And what we were talking about earlier was the list price, the absorption threshold. And the two should coincide. If the closed sales market in nearly identical homes is showing 550, and the active threshold of absorption is closer to 600, and you can't replace the home for less than 600 in any other position, then there's supportable evidence that you can use against Fannie Mae to prove that the home is worth more than the last one sold for, because the conditions are such that you cannot buy that home for less money.
Right.
Or a reasonable facsimile. All of my appraisals contain pending and active listings. You can't totally rely on them per Fannie Mae, but you have to provide them if you're claiming increasing market condition. So once we do that, again, it's what we were talking about as far as listing a property. You have to know as an appraiser, you should know what the absorption threshold is. And if you're not doing that due diligence, then you're really not paying attention to what's going on in the market.
Right. So now why we really drug you here. You ready for this one?
Oh, now I'm
Are
in
you
trouble.
ready?
Are you ready?
Because we have a lot of questions about it.
We
I think
do.
it's a real estate community, so.
As of January 2022, you will, if I am understanding correctly, be doing everything as an appraiser as a desktop appraisal. Is this correct? What can you shed light on?
That has not been, that's not a for sure thing.
Okay.
Lenders make those rules. Fannie Mae makes those rules. When COVID first started, they threw out rules for a desktop appraisal, and there was two different types. There was a desktop and an enhanced desktop, and there were, well, I guess 3 different types, because there was an exterior only version too. You know, the actual saying is you never judge a book by its cover,
Right.
and it's
Right.
never more applicable than in that situation. Me personally, I think desktop appraisals are very dangerous in most segments of the lending community. You know, there's always going to be a situation where you're coming in 75% down, 50% down, and you're a borrower with a great credit score and a good income line and all those things that would expect that borrower to be able to pay back their loan. So that the actual value of the home is less a piece of that loan package than it would be for someone who's, say, borrowing 98% of the loan or the sales price. And now all of a sudden, maybe they have a little lower credit score, maybe they have a history of non-payment, that kind of thing. Then you're really worried about the asset, because there's a very high chance that the lender is going to have to recoup that asset. So simply doing a desktop is inadequate for lending purposes in a situation where you're not putting more than 25% down. So
Right.
I would be really surprised if that is full on the way it's going to go for everything. It may be certain loan packages. They already do automated appraisal work where you can come in, and if your credit score is 800 and your loan to value is less than 80% or 75%, then they'll already do a situation where they'll immediately lend you the money
Right.
based on an automated valuation of your home, and it's not much different from a tax assessment. So that's already out there. Me personally, as soon as the COVID rules came in place, all those exteriors, I didn't even accept them. I wouldn't. I knew there were appraisers out there who didn't want to go into people's homes, that kind of thing. So I was like, well, I'll let them do it. The people that need those full appraisals with the interior inspections, I'll just stick to that, because it didn't really bother me a whole lot.
Right. Because I know from a real estate or from a realtor standpoint, doing the desktop appraisals kind of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, but kind of like concerns us, because I know like with an FHA loan and VA loans, there's certain things that those have to meet that an appraiser evaluates, right? And from a desktop standpoint, that can't happen.
Well, you also have to remember that some of those guidelines, that's, when somebody says, well, all of these are going to go to desktop, that might mean all conforming and Fannie Mae loans.
Okay.
That would be all those loans. FHA has its own rule book.
Okay.
They don't do anything ahead of Fannie Mae. They let
Right.
Fannie Mae run the course. They figure out what Fannie Mae did wrong, and then they set their own rules. That's the way it's been for 20 years, as far as I'm concerned, as far as FHA is concerned.
Right.
Okay.
So I don't think you'll immediately see that. I don't do VA loans, but they tend to be the same way. They have their own rule book. They don't
do.
really
Right.
pay attention to anybody else. They do whatever they want to do. And, clearly they're making money at it because they're still doing it. So,
Right.
Clearly.
yeah.
So-
So I don't think that that's gonna be every single loan.
Okay.
So you think that the FHA loans will still have the appraiser go in and
And do
For
the
the-
inspection.
do the inspection.
Yeah, this is December.
Correct.
And I think.
Right?
It
been a
is
long
somewhere. Oh boy.
Um,
We thought 2021 was going to
there-
be better.
if FHA was going to roll this out and they were going to go strictly to an exterior, there would already be modified guidelines for how to meet minimum property standards, because that's it's like a 400-page document that
Right.
properties have to meet FHA standards, and that would have already been published if they were going to take it away.
Okay.
So it's
Well, that's good to know.
I don't think you're going to see that FHA.
Okay.
That's a good peace of mind.
It actually
You know.
is.
So I'm like,
Well-
how are you guys going to see peeling paint, earthquake straps not there,
CO detector.
CO detect? Like, there's, I mean,
Well, and that goes back to the enhanced desktop where you would provide or be provided pictures by a third party. The problem with that being is, then you have to determine whether or not the third party is reliable, because in order to comply
Right.
with the appraisal practice standards, your data sources have to be considered reliable. It's the reason we don't use Zillow as a data source, because it's deemed unreliable locally. So I can't imagine that taking pictures from a homeowner who has a vested interest in the outcome of the appraisal would result in them providing us with the best possible data, including pictures of the mold growing in their bathrooms.
right?
Right.
They're going to shoot around that.
Right.
Well, sure.
And so because that's the case, that data becomes questioned. And if that's the case, you can't rely upon it, then you have no way of getting that data unless you go do the inspection yourself. So you simply escalate the appraisal to an interior required appraisal. So I don't know that it's set in stone yet, and I actually hadn't heard that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So